Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to yet another Word of Gord on this sunny November afternoon, where we're still living through a glorious autumn here in southern Ontario and enjoying every minute of it, I must say. Average Folks in the Afterlife, number 37, if I'm not mistaken. And I said in number 36 that we'd touch on some reflections on the whole business of the afterlife, of suicides, before getting back to Eric Medhus and my life after death. So here's an interesting little segment from my first book, Eternal Life and How to Enjoy It. That's not me on the cover, by the way. And I know you think it is. He's a terribly good-looking young fellow. But no, it's not. My first book from, 12, 14 years ago, talked a lot about the initial astral adventures of my spirit guide, calling himself Henry. And he was my guide and showed me around. And the latter part of the book talks a little more about my experiences. But here's one of Henry's from his days as a guide with souls on earth. And he'd received a bit of training after he passed himself from his guide. And here he is exercising his expertise. This time it's one of my depressed charges, and it looks as though she's going to slash her wrists in the bath. I whip down there pronto, and I'm standing behind her as she chews morosely on her breakfast toast. She thinks of her husband's betrayal and then of her son's death. The husband she could have handled, but he was never one to be trusted, and she had found him out on his affairs before. But her son, he was everything to her life really, although she didn't know it till he died. I see if I can influence her thoughts by first suggesting some marmalade for the toast. Innocuous? Well, I'm acting locally as I think globally. She pushes her chair back and somewhat robotically moves to the cupboard for the jar. I'm surprised. She seemed too focused on the act. Maybe I can talk her out of it. She seems as if she's going to move through her morning tasks and then, ever the good housekeeper, die in a spotless home. It looks pretty clean to me, but then I never did have high standards on that front. I quickly return to the astral and move to the level her son is now residing on. It's an intermediate plane for those still in transition, and not that far, actually, from where Reed is resting. Reed is his former rival for his wife's affections. And of course, it's an eternal triangle going back several past lives, but that's all you need to know for now. But whereas Reed's rest home is very similar to the countryside bed and breakfasts he's used to on his bike travels, the boy is staying with some acquaintances of mine who often take in troubled teenagers, as their residence has the required patina of trendy urban decay that so charms the young habitués of chill-out rooms of the new-style dance palaces. On Earth, he was just your average hormonally imbalanced bag of reckless energies, neither wicked nor wonderful, merely obsessed with his stage in life. Now he's remorseful and beginning to reach inside himself for reasons. I find him in the garden reading. Well, that's a step forward. I quickly relate the drama at hand, sensing that the urgency of the situation could make good use of his remorse. And indeed it does. In fact, he is thrilled to think that he can help, to think that he is being allowed to help. As a fairly new arrival, he cannot distinguish the tuggings of his mother's grief from his own overwhelming sense of futility, and seems genuinely shocked by my news. In this, of course, he is quite typical of the self-obsession of the teenage years. Just shifting the burden of his confusions from the physical to the astral does little to lessen them. He allows himself to sink into the safety of my expertise and we shift levels and arrive in the kitchen. He is immediately affected and rushes to his mother's side, who is now engaged, rather innocuously, in washing up the breakfast dishes. If I were not so inured to such scenes, I would find it heartbreaking to watch the boy's anguished attempts at consolation. He flutters around her, frantically trying to make contact. I can see the flurry of his emotions is just as confusing the issue and pull him back to the other side of the room, where I attempt to calm him and get him to join me in projecting thoughts of love and serenity toward the mother, who is now directing her efforts at the floor. Our combined efforts have anything but the effect desired. The mother stops her cleaning to weep again, recalling, as far as I can make out, some happy day from the boy's childhood. I lead him into the other room and try to explain the situation. At first he seems thrilled by the prospect of imminent reunion. I wisely refrain from saying anything about misery-loving company and go on to explain that it may not be that simple, that gloom can cast a barrier thicker even than that between the physical and astral. But my efforts fall on rather deaf ears. The house has a clammy, syrupy atmosphere that I'm beginning to find quite distasteful, but the boy seems happy enough. God knows it was easy enough for him to shuck his troubles and speed into what seems an easier existence. Why shouldn't his mom join him if she feels so shitty? Who the heck am I to tell him otherwise? Kids get no respect these days. I change the subject and ask about grandparents. Yes, 2 of them are dead, just what we need. I smile, hoping that they were not the alcoholics like the last 2 I tried to use. Lord, I couldn't even get them to leave the divey bar they were hanging out in, waiting with a mighty selection of so-called friends for some drunken incarnate to slip out of his shell so they could scrabble over who gets to go in and feel the intoxication. It's also grimy and pathetic, but at the same time desperately funny if you can momentarily disconnect. I leave the boy sitting on a couch, zip back to the astral, and put out a call. Of course, there are precious few grannies that actually look like grannies here. A conventionally pretty woman of indeterminate age approached me. Telepathy as person-to-person telephone calls again. It seems magical at first, but when you've been here a while, you take it for granted, as you do on Earth on the phone. The woman tells me she has already spent a good deal of energy trying to cheer up her daughter, but now feels it's hopeless. She wonders, somewhat accusingly, why I don't already know this, if I'm such a whiz kid. In fact, I do, but have tried to take a more positive approach. Her aura says sloth, selfishness, and toadying envy vying with anger. I should have known better. She fades from view and I return to the house in time to see the bathwater running. I can't believe the son wants to watch this, but he does, and without much emotion. She does the usual razor on the wrist, and we all watch the water turn red. There's a ghoulishness to the son's interest that makes me wonder about the number of horror movies watched and the hypnotizing effect of lower astral vibrations. Sure enough, as she's ebbing away, a motley crew of wannabe demons shows up looking for fresh meat. The atmosphere of gloom and depression draws them like flies. They saunter and creep like a group of 10-year-old boys trying to fondle lingerie on a washing line. Their clothes are tattered and their attitudes shabby. I scare them away with a couple of flashes of bright light. It's an easy trick once you've mastered it, and let me tell you, it works like a charm every time. It even stirs the son, who immediately wants to know how I did it. His "how'd you do that, man?" seems somewhat incongruous in the context of his dying mother, but that's teenagers for you. Just changing planes doesn't do a thing for anyone's intelligence, we all know that, but the truism applies equally to taste and decorum. You don't always meet the best type of people in this line of work, that's for sure. I tell him I'll explain later, and we watch the astral form of his mother appear above her wilting flesh. She is still encased in gloom, but her son's excitement soon restores her to a level I can work with. I experience the strange reunion with mixed emotions. It's very unprofessional for me to have emotions at all. My skills generally require the tact and demeanour of a highly polished maitre d' who can glide through the most awkward of situations with barely a ripple of discomfort. Amidst tears of joy and laughter, so bizarre above a still warm corpse, I lead my charges on. Using the tried and true hand-holding method, which minimizes the risk of any rubbernecking pit stops in the lower astral, we return to the boys' temporary residence. It was probably as good a place as any for them right now. Bob and Carol meet us in their rose garden, where, as they tended to their flower beds, 3 young men serenaded them with their acoustic guitars. Bob grinned in welcome, and I could sense he was grateful that they hadn't yet asked about electricity in the afterlife. Plenty of time for that later, he seemed to be thinking. Mother and son stood shyly back, engrossed in each other, as I made what they took to be arrangements. Bob and Carol's was for suicide or sudden death teenagers, but they kept a couple of spare rooms for relatives, and sure enough, both of them were currently empty. Carol sensed the situation and invited them in for a cup of tea. The newly dead mother didn't seem to think this sudden invitation at all incongruous, so simple was her transition. Wonder no more why suicide was so frowned upon in earlier times. No one would have stayed physical if they'd realized how easy it was in heaven. Yes, fear of damnation had a purpose once. I chatted with Bob a while and listened politely to the jamming guitars. Like all young men everywhere, they sought approval, and I wouldn't mind betting that lack of approval from parents played a large part in their fall from grace. Oh, life. What a grand experiment in form and expression. I made an informal departure, citing other pressing duties. The young men nodded sagely, and Bob let go a twinkle. I think he guessed my plan. There you go, another view, suicides and what might or might not happen to them. We read earlier from When Ghosts Speak, Mary Ann Winkowski's detailed memoir of her experience talking to a variety of ghosts. And insightful she certainly is. And here's an interesting example. Not that there's not plenty more, but this one's particularly interesting. Even when folks think they are doing the family a favor by ending their lives, it can result in pain and misunderstanding. Some time ago, the adult children of a mother and father who had died in a double suicide pact invited me to their parents' funeral. Unbeknownst to any of the children, their father had been diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. Knowing how short his time was going to be, he and his wife made elaborate arrangements to commit suicide. The wife went through the house and cleaned out all their possessions. She sorted them into piles to be given away and set aside special things for each of their 4 children. They organized all their financial concerns and prepaid for their funeral, right down to ordering the flowers. They left a long and detailed note for the children, explaining what they intended to do and why. And then, and this is the part that amazes me to this day, they went out to their backyard where the husband had rigged up a very complicated system with his shotgun. With the wife facing her husband, he managed to fire the gun so that the single bullet passed through his wife, killing her, and then lodged in his heart. Yes. Indeed, a very smart plan. At the funeral, the kids were struggling to understand. They wanted me to ask their parents why they had done what they did. Of course, I felt bad for the pain the children were experiencing. Yet when ghosts explained to me, these ghosts, why they had chosen to end their lives as they had, I saw how bewildered they were that all their careful preparations weren't more appreciated. I could almost understand how they'd thought they were doing exactly the right thing. No matter how many spirits of suicide victims I have talked to, I still find it hard to comprehend what might drive people to take their own lives. Some situations I can empathize with more than others. cases of terminal illness or unremitting pain or mental illness that causes profound despair. But again, for every tormented spirit I talk to who has seen suicide as the only way out of tremendous mental or physical pain, I'll meet another ghost who has inexplicably chosen to die simply to spite someone. In the case of unnatural deaths, whether by murder or suicide, I never know what I will learn in my conversations with these earthbound spirits. I don't know if there will ever be a time when I am not amazed, shocked, or outraged by what I learn. In these difficult cases, I am most often deeply affected by the impact murders or suicides have on the living, on those who are left to sort out all the reasons and details and secrets behind these deaths. Well, thank you, Mary Ann, for that. As I say, the book is filled with interesting examples of one kind or another, that being just one. And I'm sure we'll get back to it as we work our way through Eric Medhus, My Life After Death. Now, he's already been through his life review. And on this further chapter farther along, he talks about my new perspective. Since my life review and my therapy, my perspective has changed. Instead of being egocentric, where all my awareness is on me, everything feels geocentric because all the focus is on everything around me. This makes me feel an incredible connection to everything. Let me explain it in this way. When I was human, chilling in a park, I'd think, I'm in a park next to this oak tree. Now I think something like, that oak tree is near the playground, and the playground is in the park, and the park is in the city, and the city is in... You get the idea. That'd make me feel a connection to the tree, the playground, and all the other things and people in the park, and the space in between them, instead of how the texture of the bark felt against my fingertips, how the waistline of my pants was bugging the shit out of me, or that I was playing hooky so that I could have a smoke off school grounds. Being geocentric instead of egocentric doesn't mean you surrender your identity completely just because you feel like you're connected to everything. You can acknowledge your identity, but you can also acknowledge the space around has equal value to you. Imagine walking down a street and there are people holding umbrellas, traffic lights changing from green to red, cars passing by and buildings all around. Now imagine arrows pointing from you to every life force, every animal, tree, whatever's alive. These have the same value as the I. Instead of I am moving forward, it's more like I am moving in unison with all of this. Yes. Yes, Eric. Most people can feel that for fleeting moments, but if you work on it, you feel it all the time, whether you're a spirit or a human being. That means you have to change your language in the way you think. Humans usually have egocentric language. They think, I'm sitting behind a desk, which emphasizes that the most important thing is you and your location related to the desk. If you broadened that view, it'd be more like your presence in the environment as a part of the whole. You could see yourself in the south side of the room instead of your specific location in association with the desk in the room. You'll be aware of the space of the room rather than the item in the room. Then the language is going to change. You'll be like, the desk in the southern part of the room instead of, I'm sitting at the desk. The shift in my consciousness also switched from my head to my heart. My head isn't running the show anymore. There are no thoughts racing around in my head like, did that shit really happen? Yeah, that really happened. Or, oh my God, is that girl looking at me like she likes me? Or like she thinks I look like an idiot. It's so weird how I don't rely on just the thoughts in my brain anymore. I mean, I don't have a brain now, but I'm just using that word to explain what I guess I'd call head consciousness. Now my entire body communicates in a different way. It's through my heart. It's hard to explain, but my heart can now communicate independently from the voice in my head, and has the whole conversation in and of itself. that, I'd call it heart consciousness. Heart consciousness is hard to define because it's so nebulous. It's easy to grasp head consciousness because you can hear that inner voice in your head word for word. As a human, it was what I was used to, but this new type of consciousness is more emotional. Now I lead with my heart. I lead with my emotions. I feel first and think second. I feel an emotion, then that triggers a thought, and then that determines the choices I make. As a human, I had it all backward. I had a thought that triggered an emotion, and then the emotion caused me to act or react in a certain way. That shift to heart consciousness helped me heal by letting my heart take the front seat to my head so that my negative thoughts don't get in the way anymore. If I had to give that heart-centered consciousness a sensation, I would say it's like that much-needed sleep after you're physically, emotionally, and mentally exhausted. A deep, healing, relaxing sleep. When it comes right down to it, I think the biggest shift in my perspective once I became a spirit was the realization that a lot of pain I suffered when I was alive was the result of not listening to my heart and my emotions and letting my brain run away with itself. As soon as I was able to think with my heart instead of my head, I got it. I even understood the true nature of suffering. I understood that suffering is caused by resisting what you're struggling against or stamping it down or ignoring it. Thinking only with your head makes you resist stuff. Resistance comes in many forms. It might be looking away from the pain or denying it. It might be blaming someone else for it or trying to bury it in drugs or sex or whatever. If I had listened to my heart more when I was alive, I'll bet I would have been a lot happier. Even though I would have been sick, and I know that things probably would have turned out like they did. Maybe I would have reached out more or listened more or just loved more. All I know now is that if you use your heart and embrace it for what it has to offer, instead of just using your brain to resist what you struggle with all the damn time, you're going to be a lot better off, mind, body, and soul. Well, some good advice there from Eric. I could comment, but I think perhaps not this time. Don't need to hear my thoughts on absolutely everything. Well, my first look at heaven. I remember when I first started to look around, I thought it was weird that I didn't meet any angels. I was looking for them, but nope, not a single feathered winged creature to be found anywhere. The next thing I noticed was that I was in a clearing of sorts, surrounded by a dense forest. It kind of looked like what I'd expect to see on Earth, like the meadow in that scene from the movie Bambi, where his mother gets shot. My mum cries every time she sees that. At the same time, I noticed big differences. Unlike on Earth, everything seemed like it was painted with vibrant colours, even the clouds of the sky, even the air, everything. And then there were colours that I'd never seen or couldn't have imagined before. They made colours on Earth seem incredibly drab. Think about the colours on Earth and multiply their intensity by 10, by 100, by 1,000,000. And not only were heaven's colours in high definition, but they were also three-dimensional. Colours here move and live and breathe as if they have a life of their own. Looking back, that is the first memory of heaven's environment that I had. The smells are also different than the ones I experienced as a human. They were like fresh rain. There are no perfumed fragrances or dirty earth smells like pollution or exhaust. It just smells like crisp spring water. Still does. I thought it was strange that when I was looking at my surroundings, I only saw what I focused on from moment to moment. My perspective was different. It was as if my eyes were telescopic. When I focused on something really small or close to me, everything else went blurry. I also had these instant connections with whatever item I was looking at. I wasn't just observing it. I felt like I was one with it, sharing the same energy and source. Then I could pull back and see everything that was far away. After taking this all in, I looked around and saw what seemed to be a nature reserve. There were huge trees that were alive, of course, but not just in the I've got my roots in the ground and I'm growing kind of way. The bark was alive. There were sounds coming from them. If I saw that on Earth, I'd be like, somebody fucking drugged my ass. There were paths everywhere, and they weren't made of cobblestone, and they weren't paved with gold. They were just well-worn dirt paths. That really didn't make any sense now that I think about it, because my feet didn't touch the ground. It's not like I was treading on it and destroying the grass and the tiny insect like Godzilla. Later, I wondered why there were paths, and I found out it's because humans are used to seeing them, and it was helping with my transition to envision stuff that I'd recognize. When I broadened my view even more, I saw other landscapes, like deserts, snowy fields, coastlines, and grassy plains. These landscapes don't follow the same rules they do on Earth. There, I wouldn't expect to see a desert right next to a swamp. That would make no sense ecologically or geographically. But that shit happens here. I could be in a desert, walk 10 steps in one direction, and suddenly be in a swamp. I saw other spirits like I did on the way to my life review. It's difficult to describe what other spirits look like because that's shifting all the time depending on how I choose to perceive them and how they choose to be perceived. When I was first exploring, the only way I can think to describe is that everyone just looked normal to me, kind of unremarkable. It was comforting. They were doing their own thing, but it wasn't like they were paying attention to me going, "Hey, new guy." But I still felt like they were acknowledging me in some way. There were animals too, forest animals, deer, birds, squirrels. None of them seemed to be domesticated. There were also animals I had never seen on Earth. And I'm not talking about unicorns and shit like that. There are just life forces that are unique to heaven. One of the first unusual animals I saw was about the size of my hand. It was living in a tree, kind of like how a squirrel would, and was covered in lots of colours. Mostly bright yellows, dark browns, and black. It had feathers, not fur, its tail was short, and its face was striped like a chipmunk. I also noticed that there was something different about the sky, or I should say, that space above me, because it's not really the sky, like the sky on Earth. It didn't look like it belonged. It looked removed from the landscape, like it began thousands of miles away, then merging seamlessly with the horizon, like things do on Earth. It's difficult to describe, but the sky just feels huge here, like driving through Montana on a clear day, but 1,000,000 times more intense. All the sights and sounds in this expansive landscape made me feel happy as hell, but at the same time it overwhelmed me a bit. It's like being on overload listening to 4 or 5 different songs at once. But as soon as I focused on my happiness and only that, all of a sudden it was like I could hear all those songs harmoniously at the same time, clearly and easily. Actually, it's not like I had to focus on it to get it. It's almost like I had to disconnect and accept it. That's when I stopped feeling overwhelmed and started to feeling wonderment and even, dare I say it, contentment. A little bit from the chapter Manifesting Things. At first I explored parts of heaven. I thought, holy shit, I need a place to live. See, even though I'd pretty much accepted that I was a spirit now and that this was my new home, my mindset hadn't fully transitioned yet. I still kind of felt human in some ways, especially in my thoughts. I wasn't ready to go 100% into spirit mode yet, so I thought myself a house. I have a hard time describing how manifestation works here. Yeah, I know, I have a hard time describing a lot of shit. Give me a break. But if I had to put it into words, it's sort of like daydreaming, except your daydreams come to life instead of just staying in your head. It's not like it doesn't take any work. It takes practice. Like anything else, it's like thinking or dreaming something into reality. When I manifested my house, there were spirits who helped me design things based on what would make me feel comfortable as I continued my transition to heaven. They helped me create my own peaceful and familiar little world. It's weird. I can manifest things instantly just by wanting it. When I create things, there's a thought in my head and a feeling in my chest. If I only use my heart, what I create would look really abstract. It wouldn't have a form. If I only use my head, it'd look like a plain box. But using both gives me the feeling of something abstract, but the form melds with it to create something beautiful, like a finely carved cabinet or jewelry case. I like to work with my hands, so I manifested things like hammers and nails to build part of my house manually. I needed that, but not all spirits do. I think it ended up looking pretty good. I made the outside of my house with wood. I guess I'd describe it as a log cabin. On the inside, I made myself a bachelor pad, a dude's home. A dude's home, that's great. It's a 2-story house with pale wooden floors. On the first floor, I have a fireplace, some musical instruments, and a bar stocked to the hilt with liquor. So it's decked out like a party pad where I could entertain if I wanted to. On the second story, I have my couch and my TV with kick-ass speakers. No bed, though, because I don't sleep. Spirits don't need to. On both floors, I have a bunch of big windows because I like a lot of light. Oh, and it's not dirty. That's one thing about my environment I didn't bring over from Earth, where I was a slob. I'm kind of a neat freak as a spirit. Isn't that strange? I also make sure to include some material possessions to make my place feel more Earth-like some video games, a skateboard, and a motorcycle. Of course, a motorcycle. Outside my door, I have a beautiful view. My house sits on top of a hill in a remote area, and the landscape is really green. It reminds me of the surroundings my family's little cabin had back in Norway. There are a few tall trees that are pointy like fir trees, and there's a lake off in the distance. The air around smells crisp and refreshing like mountain air. Just for the hell of it, I created a pair of boobs by making 2 hills with a tree on top of each one. I thought that was pretty funny. Well, Eric, I don't know how many other people will think that's funny, but each to their own. Now, you might be thinking, but if he's a spirit and in heaven, why does he need to manifest all this shit he's not going to use, like a house, booze, TV, and stuff? The only answer I have for that is this. It made me happy to have created a living space like the one I did, right down to the little inconsequential stuff that, I'd never really use as a spirit. It was still important to me at that early stage, even if it wasn't necessary. At first, what I made was based on memories of my life on Earth, because those memories were still really strong. I remembered my home, what I ate, what I wore, and what my house and my surroundings were like. So I created all these for myself and more. What's weird is that the minute I didn't need what I created, it stopped existing. And so after I got over my transition period and started really letting go of my earthly possessions, all these things just disappeared. I can manifest it back into existence, and sometimes I do. But it's not something I really need anymore. So, a little bit about manifesting, and I think those of you who have been following all the entire series of Average Folks in the Afterlife will remember some of the amusing tales of others from older books many years ago, trying to manifest and create on the astral, and not being terribly good at first. And it can take a while. You need others to help you, more experienced people. And you just need to sort of focus the perfect picture in your imagination, and then it manifests in front of you. But the thing is, it won't be the perfect picture at first. It'll be kind of a rough sketch. And when you manifest it, holy, it will look like a rough sketch too. So, you have to work on the details and the textures and the colors and the surfaces and, yada, yada, yada. On and on it goes. But it's all fun. That's for darn sure. So, there we go. Number 27. No, 37. Sorry. I'm losing count, and that's not because I'm senile, but because I'm not focused. I'm too busy looking at myself in the camera here. Vanity, I tell you. It's a curse. So, blessings to you all, and we'll see you next time.